in the next 10 days, altcoins will continue to escalate. And I'll show you this using charts. I'll show you why Ethereum is about to outperform Bitcoin in the near future, what's really going on right now, why we're currently stagnating, but why things are about to pick up again. But before we continue, friends, as always, leave a like and a comment. Once again, this video was a lot of work. That's why I appreciate every bit of support. So let's continue. After we tested the 50 EMA, we needed an upward trend. And we have that now. Now we've had a minor correction. What's going on here? Before we talk about Ethereum and so on, let's briefly discuss Bitcoin and the overall market. Here we have the Bitcoin price chart. In blue here, we have the M2 money supply. I've shifted the M2 money supply here so that it lines up exactly with Bitcoin for us. And I'll show you that. Here we had our bottom. Of course, we also had the Bitcoin bottom here. Here, the upward trend. That was this upward trend. Then a stagnation phase, which we also saw here. Here, the next upward trend. Here, the next upward trend, stagnation phase. Here, the next upward trend. Take a look at this. We've just seen it. And as you can already see, now we have a stagnation phase here. We are currently experiencing this stagnation phase as well. This is this phase here. But after that comes the next big jump. And that's why I'm telling you, in the next few days, we're going to see Bitcoin explode. And especially the altcoins are going to perform really well because as you can see for yourselves, when we stagnate here, we also stagnated back then with the M2 money supply. The M2 money supply basically shows us the future. And that's what you need to understand. And that's why in the near future, we're going to seize this area. That means if things go well, we could even go straight for new all-time highs. Because what's happening with Bitcoin right now is quite obvious. We've picked up liquidity to the upside here, liquidating 200 or 300 million at times. And now we've done the same to the downside. We can see it. Money was picked up here and money was picked up down here, just like every time. But this time, we finally had a smaller interim correction. From here, we should continue moving forward because as you can see, with the M2 money supply, we also only had a slight stagnation, a minor correction, nothing major. After that, things continued upward. And that is also reflected in our current Bitcoin price. With Ethereum, we have a different picture. Specifically with Ethereum, we can see that we've broken out of a massive, intense, bearish trend, which is extremely important. This here is the Ethereum versus Bitcoin chart. Here we can clearly see that when Ethereum outperforms Bitcoin and for a long time, that definitely wasn't the case. You can see the downtrend here. But thankfully, we've broken through it and are now in an uptrend with Ethereum. That means we are outperforming Bitcoin with Ethereum. And that should remain the case for now. It's really, really great to see. What we're also seeing is that whales have recently started investing aggressively in Ethereum. And you know very well, the whales always front run everything. If the whales are doing this now, we'll soon follow suit with Ethereum. And that's why I believe Ethereum will outperform Bitcoin in the near future, because we're going to see a jump here with Bitcoin as well anyway. If Ethereum then heads towards $3,000 or $4,000, that will of course be huge for the altcoins, because I mean Ethereum was in a downtrend against Bitcoin for 3 years, and thankfully we've now broken out of that downtrend, which is extremely important. And this is exactly the point in time when people start to become more willing to take risks. People are gradually shifting into Ethereum, and that slowly starts to flow over into the altcoins. And of course, you also have to keep an eye on Bitcoin dominance. Here, I'm looking at Bitcoin dominance, excluding stablecoins, because we were already close to an altcoin high. We were almost at the same level as in the last cycle. But right now, we're in a risk-off environment. That means investors are not taking on much risk here. The lower we fall here, the more interesting it gets. And if we then drop into this risk-on area from just under 60%, things will get really interesting. Because, as I said, you can see for yourself, that's when people mainly invest in large caps and smaller altcoins. And that's why I keep an eye on this chart in the background all the time. And it's very, very important to see what's happening here. Currently, we can see that Bitcoin dominance has stabilized a bit again, which actually isn't a bad thing. Because what's ultimately important is that if we're expecting an altcoin season later on, we see exactly this happening. Bitcoin dominance should drop, like in this example here, while the Bitcoin price continues to rise, and then we'll see the mega altcoin pump. A lot of people mistakenly believe that the Bitcoin price also drops when Bitcoin dominance falls, but that would actually be bad. That would be the scenario down here, and in that case, not much would really happen with the altcoins. So what we want is for the Bitcoin price to rise while Bitcoin dominance falls, and when that happens, the altcoins will automatically explode. And what's crazy is that if we really look at Bitcoin dominance here without stablecoins, we can see that we've actually been in a downward trend in terms of the RSI since July 2022. And now a lot of people are asking, how can that be when we keep continuously rising here? That's because the stablecoins always have continuously built up further. Accordingly, we are in a downside trend here. And looking at the RSI, we can also see that we are falling further bit by bit. Although we have now risen again briefly, that's not a problem. During this brief rise, I'll show you, now only tested our 50% Fibonacci level. So it's a completely normal correction, just as it should be. Accordingly, it could go a bit lower again now. So here we can clearly see what's actually happening in the background. The good thing, however, is that the stablecoins have continued to build up. Really, we're talking about multiple billions flowing in here. Of course, that's also in combination with the M2 money supply. As a result, we have significantly more capital on the sidelines in this cycle, which can be invested very quickly here. That's insanely huge. I mean, $240 billion that just sitting in stablecoins here is already crazy. I mean, our bull market top in the last cycle was around the point where we only had about 130 billion in stablecoins. Today, we have double that. And as I said, that's just the money that's waiting on the sidelines to be invested. And right now, since we've gone up nicely again, the question comes up more often, hey, Crypto Maxi, where should I invest now? What is still worth it? And so on. You know how it is. And that's always the problem. The best time to invest would have been 3, 4, 5 weeks ago when prices were much lower. But let's look at the whole thing rationally and see where do we stand right now? Because of course, it doesn't have to be the case that we're overheated, since when I look at some things, we're actually not overheated yet. We still have good upside potential ahead of us. This here is the funding heat map. And we can see if we add the Bitcoin price here, the higher Bitcoin rises, and if the funding rate also increases. At some point, we just become way too overheated, and then a bigger crash follows. That's how it's been every time in the past. But right now, we can see that we're not yet in the overheated zone. Even if we add Ethereum here, this is the Ethereum chart. Yes, the open interest has risen nicely, all well and good. Let's look at the funding rate down here. We're at an extremely low level, because if we were in an overheated zone now, the funding rate would be spiking sharply here. And that's not the case. That's damn good. That means, in any case, both Bitcoin and of course the altcoins still have good potential to move up. But I especially believe that because we're now seeing a golden cross on the daily chart. Take a look at this. And you know exactly what can happen after that. Here, for example, we also had a golden cross where the yellow line was crossed. And then just look at this upward trend. I don't want to say too much, but even back in the 2021 cycle, the cycle started with a golden cross. Here we fell below. Here we fought our way back up. Here we had a golden cross. And then we had a massive, massive bull run. So a golden cross in Bitcoin is currently very, very positive. And that's why I personally think we're not yet in an overheated zone. And I believe you can still invest in a few altcoins these days. And that's why we're now going to talk about a few altcoins that I would still invest in today, where I can still say, okay, I still see potential there. Anyone who is in our trading VIP group already knows that we've been actively investing in altcoins over the past few weeks. Since our entry into SUI, we've made over 150% profit just with SUI in spot trading. And that's without leverage, guys. So we also sometimes post spot positions that we buy in our trading group. Just check it out. In our trading group, you get signals about when and how we trade, but we also share spot purchases when and where we buy in spot. So make sure to check it out. Above all, it's all free. You can find all further information in the description. Now, let's talk about a few projects that are currently interesting. And for this, you can always look at specific on-chain data. For example, with XRP, you can actually check how much XRP is burned per day. And here, on average, you can see that about 3,000 XRP are burned per day. And with this amount of XRP, 50 billion currently in circulation, 3,000 just isn't a big deal. You just have to be honest about that. Of course, with XRP so far, everything has mostly been based on speculation, the price, and so on. I don't want to talk down the project, but I just wanted to give you an example. With most projects, since this is really on the blockchain, you can actually check where and how real utility is happening. And I always think that's really important. That's why today I've picked out some good projects for you that I currently find interesting. One of them is, without a doubt, Ondo, because JP Morgan has formed a partnership with 2 cryptocurrencies for their own RWA platform. So the largest bank in the world is now working together with cryptocurrencies. And one of them is Ondo, and that's why Ondo is damn interesting. Ondo also has partnerships with PayPal and so on. But there is also frequent criticism of Ondo. It's actually a relatively newly launched project. Ondo has only been around since 2024. Accordingly, we definitely have higher inflation here because people bought in cheaply back then. I'll show you that as well. The ICO was at 0.05 cents. And yes, you can see for yourselves, Ondo is almost at $1 today. The seed and Series A rounds were, of course, significantly lower. Accordingly, there are some investors here who were able to buy into Ondo at very favorable prices. And in the end, this slows us down a bit in the long term because we have inflation here. But I specifically checked, and this year the Ondo supply will double. For such a good project, that might still be manageable. But after that, it gets really ugly, as a lot more will enter circulation. That means this year, there will definitely be significant inflation, and this inflation at Ondo will slow us down. But I think it's still manageable this year. In the following years, though, we'll have to see whether this might completely hold back the price. Because what really has to be said about Ondo is that on-chain things look really good. Ondo now has won $2 billion just in TVL. For a market cap of $3 billion, that's incredibly good. Ondo is truly an absolute powerhouse in the RWA sector. And you just have to admit that here. And then there are the partnerships now with JP Morgan and so on. I have to be completely honest. I see minimum price targets of around $9 to $10 for Ondo in this cycle, but it could definitely go much higher. That's what I definitely expect from Ondo because, as I said, Ondo is the powerhouse in the RWA sector. And I believe the RWA sector could really take off in this cycle. The second project that JP Morgan has included here is Chainlink. And that's why we also need to talk about Chainlink, because Chainlink is also a top project, really. First of all, it's been on the market for quite a while, and Chainlink also has a unique selling point. Thanks to CCIP, they are highly interoperable and offer real utility. You can see it here. The utility is increasing day by day. Pretty much every crypto project uses Chainlink when it comes to oracles. In addition, since the introduction of CCIP, another revenue system and so on have been added. So Chainlink has really done incredibly well. And above all, Chainlink is known for its oracles. And in this regard, no one can compete with them. Because Chainlink holds about 60% of this entire market, and their oracles manage nearly $42 billion. That's crazy. So Chainlink's on-chain activity has continuously grown over the past few years, because it's a project that actually provides real utility. And as I said, almost every crypto project uses Chainlink for their oracles. That's why I'm definitely optimistic about Chainlink. And just from a technical analysis perspective, based on Elliott wave analysis, we would expect price targets of at least $100 in this cycle. I definitely see $100 to $150 as a realistic target for Chainlink in this cycle. It's truly a top project with more and more partnerships and ever-improving models. You can definitely be optimistic about that. The third project I have for today is IONET. And IONET is a project we've actually talked about quite a few times here on the channel, and where some members of the community were able to buy in very well during the dip. IONET benefits from this deep narrative no matter what. But nowadays, IONET already has verifiably over 35,000 GPUs in 138 different countries. That's really impressive. In some cases, they are up to 70% cheaper than Amazon AWS. They train AI agents and have real utility because in the end, IONET also has a special cluster system. IONET is a platform where people can rent GPU and CPU power to render things, develop games, train AIs, and so on. And by now, we really have way too many of these kinds of crypto projects. The only difference is IONET has real utility. By now, they have earned over $12 million in revenue alone. Above all, you can see they have real utility, they have real people using the product, because the difference with IONET is simply this. IONET, I believe, was released last year, and since then, they've been building continuously and earning more money every month. So in this regard, it's truly a top project. Then we have another AI project, namely TensorTau. Tau is basically the leader in this AI space. Tau is an infrastructure project on which other AI projects can build. The brilliant thing is, we have miners here just like with Bitcoin, but these miners are rewarded with Tau. They mine the token and simultaneously train AIs. So it's truly a sophisticated system, which is absolutely ingenious. And above all, the development in recent years has been crazy, because by now we have over 110 projects building on Tau, making Tau essentially the AI layer 1 platform, the Ethereum for AI. It's really crazy when you think about it. By now, you can even trade subnets here. The brilliant thing about this is that it only works with the native Tau token. This creates even more incentives to hold, trade, and so on with the token. Really, really nice. Tau has a huge community, and Tau just has this chillability. People are chilling this thing all the way to the moon, and they're really good at it, sometimes even with over-the-top graphics. But in the end, that's exactly what can push a project into the top 10. Chillability. Very, very important. And from a chart analysis perspective, things are looking pretty good for Tau as well. Please take a look at it. Back then, we had an uptrend here, really nicely built out the 1, then the corrective 2, followed by an ABC. And overall, we should then move into the 3, 4, and 5. We would only move into the 3 once we sustainably break through our all-time high of $780 here. Then we move into the 3, then into the 4, and that should be our bull run scenario. In this bull run, we expect minimum price targets of $2,500 per tau. So here too, we are definitely optimistic. In the long term, as I said, it's one of the best AI projects we have in this market. And then we also have SUI. SUI, yes, by now everyone knows it too. I really like SUI because we can clearly see that it's a project that actually has real utility again. Many are now building on SUI. You can see it here in the background. Money is flowing out of the other chains and finding its way into SUI. In terms of TVL, we're now at $2 billion. If you think about the fact that less than 2 years ago, we were at 20 million and now we're at 2 billion TVL. That's just crazy. In terms of growth, things are looking really, really good here. Exactly what we want to see. Stablecoins also continuing to build on SUI and so on. I really like that on-chain activity just the way we want it. And from a technical chart perspective, things are also looking pretty good overall. From a charting standpoint, I expect minimum price targets of $14 in this cycle. That's the minimum I see for SUI here, because this is also a project that I consider a solid play for this cycle in the long term. It has good partnerships, is well connected, and has a functioning system that people are actually building on. That's the big difference compared to all those other projects. Something is actually happening here. These are also the kinds of things I pay attention to, that real utility is being created on the blockchain. In this regard, I also have HBAR on my radar, especially because of this RWA narrative. HBAR actually performed strongly even in the bear market, but still went up pretty steeply along with XRP. HBAR is also an ISO candidate and is completely connected with the banks in the ISO sector and CBDC area. Incredible. The partnerships are truly gigantic. HBAR has a really close connection to the Australian government. HBAR was even used here for the largest Australian dairy producer in terms of supply chains. With HBAR, they were able to make supply chain tracking much more precise, much better. And as a result, they were able to save a lot of money. In the long run, that's just absolutely brilliant. You can also see here that HBAR is ultimately active in the supply chain management sector. And by now, they're covering the entire market. That means if we hit the ISO narrative in a full-blown bull run, HBAR will benefit massively. But if we stick with the RWA sector, which in my opinion is almost certain to happen in this cycle, HBAR will also get a piece of the pie and be able to perform well just from that alone. That's why in terms of narrative, HBAR really covers a lot, which I really like, especially because HBAR now has close ties to Citi and ABN in the RWA sector. So huge banks that have especially wanted to enter the RWA sector recently, and they will very likely use HBAR there, because HBAR is an official member of ERC 3643, an organization that primarily tokenizes assets. This partnership ultimately opens the doors for major institutional investors. And the picture is just becoming clearer and clearer. HBAR is being used nowadays. It has good connections. The connections are getting better and better with increasingly larger banks. And in terms of narrative, as I mentioned to you, HBAR can cover quite a lot here, whether in the RWA sector, the supply chain sector, or even partly in the AI sector. That's something I really like quite a lot. And from a chart analysis perspective, we can also talk about it. This is how it looks. In our last cycle, this was the one, here was the corrective 2, our bear market. And from there, the breakout. That means in this cycle, I expect at least $1.18. But here, it could also go up to $2 or $2.50. But that's the minimum I expect in this cycle. And I think as an HBAR investor, you can already be quite satisfied with that. And I think I was definitely able to show you in this video that we currently have bullish tendencies based on several indicators. Accordingly, we can definitely go higher, and we are not yet in the overheated zone, which is extremely important, because it could also be the case that Bitcoin is already overheated and we would first need a correction. Actually, we do need a correction because we've gone up too fast, too steeply, but we are not in the overheated zone. The big Bitcoin surge also came in part simply from spot purchases, from ETF buys, Michael Saylor, and so on. Accordingly, we are not over leveraged here yet, and therefore the market makers don't have to send us into a major correction just yet, although of course at some point a correction will become overdue. Overall though, everything is finally looking very, very positive again. Now it just remains exciting to see how long this will last, because of course some people tend to expect that the summer will be corrective. But I just give you numbers, data, and facts that clearly show, hey, fundamentally this can definitely keep rising, and fundamentally we are not yet in an overheated zone. Right now we have bullish tendencies. We have the M2 money supply, which is looking pretty good. There are just a lot of very, very positive things when you look at the bigger picture. But of course, you shouldn't fall into FOMO or anything like that. Now, naturally, everything should be approached rationally, but it's also important to point out the positive things. And I hope I was able to help you with this video. I definitely put a lot of effort into this. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you would like to see more of these longer videos. Otherwise, my videos are usually a bit shorter.